Hello, happy Monday, and welcome to the Grace Avenue Midday Devotional. My name is Billy Eccles Richter, and I have the joy of being one of the pastors at the church. And it's so great to be with you today as we spend just a few moments studying God's Word. I'd like to talk to you today for a few moments about normalcy. It seems like right now we are trying to figure out the new normal. Since the pandemic has hit us and we have been sheltering in place, I hear so many people talking about the changes that are going on in the routines of their lives. You know, we eat a certain way and we work a certain way and we play a certain way, and we refer to all of that as what is normal for us. And it just seems like all of that has changed. We've been thrown off kilter. We've been thrown out of balance. One of the things that we need to remember in the beginning of this discussion is that normal is a standard of measurement. It's what we call the norm. If you imagine a carpenter's angle or a carpenter's T-square, and in the right angle of that T-square, right down there in the middle where the two sides come together, that's called the norm. The norm. And so from that word, we get the word normal. Oftentimes when I study the Bible, I don't just look at certain verses or certain words or certain stories even, but sometimes I look for patterns in the Bible. And I think that is a very important part of this discussion today. At the beginning of the Gospel of John, which is the fourth book in the New Testament, we have this amazing pattern that emerges. Now, the Gospel of John starts differently than any of the other Gospels. It starts with this almost very theoretical, philosophical language. It says in verse 1, "In the beginning was the Word," capital W. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And then when you skip down to verse 14, it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of God's only Son." And then you skip over to verse 16, and it says, "From this fullness we received grace upon grace." Well, of course, one of the things that the first chapter of John is talking about, when it talks about the Word, it's talking about Jesus, the Christ, and how God sent Jesus into the world. And this idea that Jesus came to live among us, to be right in the middle of us. Verse 14 is so crucial. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Scholars tell us that a good translation for that is that Jesus moved into the neighborhood. Jesus pitched his tent with us. In other words, this God, whom we often talk about as being so far away or over everything, this God came to live right in the middle of where we are. And I think that is so significant. But what is interesting is then to see the pattern that emerges in the Gospel of John. So if you turn to the beginning of chapter 2 in the Gospel of John, the story you find there is the story of Jesus' first miracle. In the Gospel of John, the first miracle is when Jesus goes to a wedding and he changes water into wine. It's a beautiful story. But the reference at the very beginning of that story is it was the third day of the wedding. Now, that doesn't make much sense to us because we don't have weddings that go on for several days. But John could not be more clear. They were in the middle of the wedding when they ran out of wine, and Jesus' mother went to him and basically said, "Can you do something about this?" And the story unfolds from there. But it was right in the middle of the wedding that Jesus and the miracle occurred. Well, then you go over to chapter 3, and it's one of the other great stories in our Bible. At the beginning of chapter 3, Jesus meets a man named Nicodemus. And it's in the great story of Jesus' encounter with Nicodemus that he explains to Nicodemus that if he wants to experience life at its fullest, if he wants to experience wholeness, he must be born again. And in the great story of Nicodemus, we get real focused on all that. But what we forget about in the beginning of that story is that Nicodemus came to Jesus in the middle of the night. Very unusual. People didn't travel at night. People couldn't just walk in and flip a switch. To go and see someone in the middle of the night was very much out of the ordinary. But here was Nicodemus wanting to know about the meaning of his life. And so he came and he met Jesus in the middle of the night. And then we come to chapter 4. And chapter 4 has one of the most amazing stories you're ever going to want to find in the Bible. It's a story about Jesus' encounter with the woman at the well. There's so much in this story. It's such a rich story, has a lot of intricacies, and when you really begin to study it, you see some fascinating things about how Jesus encountered this woman and how he talked to her about the importance of living water and how we are never thirsty again when we encounter Jesus. But one of the things that it makes clear is that when you start that story, Jesus meets this woman at noon. He meets her in the middle of the day, and scholars make a lot out of that as well. But I just want to pause for a moment and think about what that pattern looks like in those first 4 chapters. Here is God, who seems to be outside of everything, but the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He came to live in our neighborhood. He came to be right in the middle of everything that we do. And then we go to this wedding, and the miracle occurs when? At the beginning of the wedding? At the end of the wedding? No, it happens right in the middle of the wedding. And then we turn over and we see Jesus have this amazing encounter in which he talks about this man and his life and how he can find wholeness. And it happens in the middle of the night. And then Jesus comes and offers living water to a woman who is so desperate in her life about so many things. And he meets her at the well in Samaria in the middle of the day. Here's my point, and I think if you look throughout the Gospel of John, you can find this pattern over and over again. But isn't it true that what normal really is to have God at the center of our lives? Normal is really placing Jesus in the center of everything we do. I think one of the reasons our lives get so out of balance is because we push God to the periphery. Oh, we like having God a little bit on the side. It's good to have God as sort of a side dish, but we need to make God the main entree of our lives. We need to put God back into the center of our lives, because when God is at the center of our lives, things can change all around the world. Things can change as the calendar changes. And yet our lives have this amazing stability because God is the norm. God is that place in the center of our T-square. God is what makes things normal. But we have to make a choice by faith that we allow God to be at the center of everything we do. We allow God to be at the center of our family. We allow God to be at the center of our work. We allow God to be at the center of our friendships, our relationships. We allow God to be at the center of even our politics and even our social views. When we put God at the center, we begin to find a normalcy that is life-giving and the way that life was created. So I'm going to invite you today to, first of all, go back and reread those first 4 chapters of the Gospel of John. There's some other stories in there as well. But read the story from the very beginning of John about how God became flesh, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And then flip over, read the story of the miracle of the wedding at Cana at the beginning of chapter 2. Read the story of Jesus and Nicodemus, how he told him to be born again, which is at the beginning of chapter 3. And then read the story of Jesus' encounter with the woman at the well at the beginning of chapter 4. And then I encourage you this week, spend time thinking about how God can be at the center of your life through Jesus Christ. And in doing so, I think you'll find the normal that you're looking for. I hope you have a great week. I hope you continue to find a sense of normalcy that puts God at the center. Great to be with you. God bless you.